Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Eric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3 and I have 3.
My name's Hallie and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter and I love eating.
My name's Chase and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
This episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess is sponsored by the children's book Feathers Matter. As our kids grow up, they face challenges in their life, and knowing their self-worth and their value is crucial to face the headwinds. Purchase this beautiful story to read to your kids and grandkids and start the conversation with them at a young age. They are worthy, they matter, and their feathers matter. You can find the link to order on our Blended, Blessed, alwaysamess.com page. Mention code #blessed for an autographed copy. Welcome to this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess, where one of us is actually on location. That would be me. I am at my friend David Hockman's home, and David is joining us today as a co-dad. We are talking about what it's like to be a father. This episode drops on Father's Day weekend, and so thought, Mother's Day, Angie did her own solo episode. I didn't feel brave enough to do a solo episode. So David is a guy that we met at our church, The Crossing, a few years back, and him and his wife, Sherry, have become good friends of mine and Angie's and walked our grief journey with us. And just, we have a lot in common, good friends. And David is someone who, him and I have a lot in common in our spiritual journeys and things that happen as we were raised and as we try to know the Lord better and even in our parenting. And so we've been, first we were having coffee and now we've been doing what I call walk and talks, where we walk and the conversation just kind of flows. And I said, David, would you want to be on this podcast? And I don't know that you wanted to, but you kindly have said yes to doing it.
I'm happy to help.
I appreciate you. Help. David has had a long and successful career as a surgeon, and now he is newly enjoying retirement and figuring out what the next steps are. So
that's right.
Thanks again for being here. Tell me a little bit about your beautiful wife and your 3 kids for our listeners that don't know you.
Okay. Well, my wife and I, Sherry, have been married for 32 years this August. We have 3 children, 2 boys are 28 and 26 this summer. And then Paige, our youngest daughter, is 24 this summer. All 3 of them got married within about a year of each other, starting 2 Memorial Days ago. So it's been quite a ride to go through all of that and increase the family size from 5 to 8. So it's been good.
Yeah. Well, David, one of the things that I love about you is just your heart. When you speak, it just comes through a lot of wisdom, but a lot of honesty. And I think for me, that's one of the things that draws me to you as a friend is that very much like myself, you're very open, but open about the struggles, not just successes. I mean, you're very open in things you wish maybe you could have done differently. And the fact that you are such a person that wants to have this great relationship with God, but also be a good husband and a good father. And so that's really why I wanted to have you on today. And so I thought we could just start out. Parenting is not easy. Mm-hmm. And this is a blended family podcast. You have a traditional family, and both of us come from homes where our parents were married. So right. For me, being in a blended family, as I've talked to you about, that's kind of new, right? And I have to navigate that all the time. But at the same time, we both have a little bit of similar upbringings in the fact that we had strong fathers and we learned some things and maybe some things we wish we could do differently in that process. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like growing up with our dads, the good and the bad. And I'll let you start.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a small town in Oak Grove, Missouri, where my dad had a hardware store. So he and my mom worked together side by side pretty much most of my childhood. After school, I'd walk home to the hardware store and hang out until it was time to go home and have dinner together as a family. So I feel like I grew up in that hardware store, and he taught me a lot of things related to, work around the house and helping out the people who are less fortunate, elderly. We would drive to somebody's house and change their furnace filter and put in their screen door and things like that. So just, from that standpoint, that was all really good. It was all really good for me to grow up there and have those experiences.
And what are some things, like for me, I would say, like my dad, when I grew up, he managed a grocery store. So I would love to go to the grocery store and like learn how to do inventory and things like that, and how to stock a shelf or
Right. Yeah.
put things in the grocery bag. And those were good skills. And my dad was a hard worker. And from what I know about your dad, he was a hard worker. I would say as a son, and I didn't get this right when I started parenting. Again, we've got a lot of moms that are listening that are probably trying to figure out why their husbands do things wrong as a father. And I will probably hit on a lot of those things. But what I really wanted was some kind of relationship with my dad, and more so than just teach me what you do, right? I wanted some kind of connection, which I think vertically goes back to, we want this connection with God, our real father. But now we're looking for it in our earthly dads who help give us life. And I didn't get that from my dad until I was older. Did you?
Yeah, I had the same experience. It was, the closeness occurred more when I was an adult. It was almost as if you're just kind of waiting, and he's waiting maybe until I'm mature enough to have more of the adult relationship. A lot of us, our mothers are the primary caregiver and the dad's in the support role. And you just don't necessarily, don't have conversations about emotions. You don't have conversations about how you're feeling. It's all just kind of like, what do I do next? What do I do in this situation? I have trouble with reading out loud, so he had me read out loud to him. They're just kind of physical needs getting met, emotional needs, that's kind of shifted to your mom. But it's also likely a generational issue too, where they just probably didn't talk about those things. And so, yeah, I was a pretty emotional kid. One doctor said, David's just very high strung, which might have been a kind way of saying you have a really anxious kid. Yeah, I think it was much later to develop that kind of relationship with my father.
For me, and I carried a lot of anger about it for a long time. I hit that when I went off to college. It was almost like he missed me and realized he had missed out or something, is what it felt like.
Oh, yeah.
And then from 18 to the day after my 27th birthday, he fell over dead of a heart attack. And we had become best friends at that point. Yeah. But I felt like I got cheated out of time, and I still had so much more to learn. And my kids were 1 and 4 when he died. And so I'm not ready to fully parent, not have a dad to ask the questions to and things like that. And so, for me, I'm open to say that I've blown it a lot as a dad. I would like to think I'm getting better at it, but I tried to parent the same way my dad did, which was with a really hard, I'm a strong-fisted man, and we believe in Jesus, and we're doing things a certain way. And I would say the biggest mistake I made for a long time, until I met Angie and she started to teach me otherwise, is that I try to parent all 3 of my children, an oldest girl and 2 boys, the exact same way.
Right.
And looking back on it now, you can't parent kids exactly the same. How about you, David? Did you just right out of the gate, you got the dad thing down?
No, not at all. Like you said, we tend to parent how we were parented. So we pass down, potentially trying to be as neutral as I can in saying this, I guess, but we tend to pass on some of the bad stuff that's passed on to us. And that could be anything from expectations being too high, perfectionism, shame, using shame as a motivator. My goal is, honestly, when I was raising my kids when they were younger, my goal was I just don't want them to end up like I was in high school. So if I get these kids into high school decently well behaved, then I will have succeeded. And I think that leads to the parenting the same way with each child. You have a goal. It's the same goal. It's compliance. And so you're not really seeing the need to parent differently because you're not going after their heart. Looking at my 3 children and how different they all are, especially between 2 boys and a girl, trying to get to their heart, to know them so that they feel understood, so that they feel seen and safe and soothed and secure, all those, attachment things. And I learned that, after they're in college, trying to figure out, how do I improve what I've messed up and being too harsh.
When you and I were walking and talking about this, doing this episode about a week or so back, that was the one thing that struck me as an overarching theme for this episode. And so dads, if you're listening, moms that are listening, when you said those words out loud to me, it was like somebody had hit me over the head, is that you're right. We parent at least most of us dads, I'm sure not everyone, but most of us parent for compliance. We're not parenting after our children's hearts.
Right.
And again, let's tie that back into Jesus came for our hearts. Like, yeah, he still obeys the rules and wants the compliance, but you're compliant because Jesus has taken our heart. And our kids, we
Right.
should want them to be compliant because we've gone out and sought their hearts. And that's I think it's harder to do now probably than ever with everything that's going on in our world and all the social media and the technology and all of the things.
Right.
And so for you to say that to me, I mean, that just hit me. I mean, I think that immediately to me was like, well, that's our real big theme for a Father's Day podcast is how do dads
Right.
go after our kids' hearts? And what was a moment that for you that really hit? Or were there many that it was like, this is what I need to be doing?
Well, I think you make a great point in looking at how Jesus goes after our hearts with a relationship filled with grace and love and friendship and a daily walk that you can have with him. I don't really feel like that I was supposed to be going after my children's hearts until I understood how God was pursuing my heart. So my spiritual upbringing was heavy-handed, legalistic, rules-based. And so, if my God just wants me to behave and I'm not very good at it, then, what am I expecting of my kids? Well, but if God loves me and he delights in me and he wants to have a relationship with me and he's pursuing me and he's the shepherd that will leave the 99 sheep behind and go after me. He died for me. When I think about and let that affect my heart, now I'm ready to behave out of love and not out of fear. And I think that's what it means to go after our kids' hearts, that they know that they're deeply loved no matter what, and by us and by God. And then they know then that there's things that God has prepared for them to do. There's things we haven't prepared to do, some chores or whatever. But hopefully with the out of relationship of love and grace, they want to be compliant. They want to please their father and mother. They want to please their Father in heaven. And so, I think for me, it was as I got further along in my spiritual journey away from legalism and more towards grace, by the help of a lot of wonderful people who stepped in my life, especially the Crossing Church, that's really been a big change. But it's been about 7 years since I've been, or 8 years at the Crossing. So my kids were, mostly almost out of the house by the time I was starting to feel like I was figuring some stuff out.
I say all the time, I've said to Pastor Dave, I've said to Pastor Shay, sometimes I feel like a failure that it's taken me this long to figure it out. Right. And that's your and I's upbringing, right? We're very hard on ourselves.
Right. It's a shame.
We carry a lot of shame. We talk about that in our walks that we take together. And it's that, as we talked about before the podcast, it's giving ourselves grace. It's giving our spouses and significant others grace, and it's giving our kids a lot of grace because as we have to remind each other, what did we decide? It's like 27-ish before their brains are even fully developed.
Yeah, right.
So here we are. You might have I've got twin 15-year-olds in my house, and sometimes like, why would they ever do that? Ever? And then
because we never did, right?
Right. Because like I've done that, and then two, their brain is another 12 years before there's full development there. So giving grace to them is really important. And I'll give an example. My son graduated high school a few weeks back, Carter, and you graduate and there's parties.
Yeah.
And might be a drink or two involved. And he felt like he'd waited several hours to get himself home that night. And I had to remember the first time that my dad found out after I had graduated that I had a couple beers and thought, hey, I can drive home.
Oh.
And he was really upset, right? And I remember I didn't ever talk back to my dad. But this one time I was like, I always heard the stories about how drunk you would get in high school. And he shut up real fast. And I was like, I didn't even drink till after I got out of high school. And I said that to him.
Yeah.
And about 24 hours went by. And it was one of the first times I remember my dad really showing me grace, that he came and he said, I'm upset with what you did, but you're right. I was a lot worse than you were in high school. And so what I would say to you is, I just want you to be safe and I love you. And so no matter where you are or what time of night it is, if you have anything to drink, you call me and I will pick you up.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
awesome.
until I went back to college, then that's, in a couple of months, my dad, I'd go out with some buddies, have a few drinks, and my dad would come pick me up. I'm not
Wow.
encouraging kids to drink underage. I'm just trying to give an example of the grace that my dad showed. So then with my own
Right.
son, I didn't yell at him, which 5 years ago I would have just been screaming at people because until I met Angie, I was a loud screaming father. That was how I did it. That was how I grew up.
I understand.
And so I just said to him, I said, son, I'm going to show you the same kind of grace that my dad showed me and that God has shown me and through my sins over the years, that you might have thought you'd waited a long time, and maybe you had, but I just don't ever want you to risk it because I love you too much.
Yeah.
And same deal that my dad gave me. If you ever have anything to drink, I'll pick you up. I said, I hope one day when you have a son, this conversation is something you remember and you have the same kind of grace.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. That is awesome. That's exactly the way I think that God looks at us and feels towards us. Is he motivated out of love? He wants to show more grace. And when we receive that, we want to please him more. And, my father and mother were not yellers. I don't know how I became such a yeller, but
well, you're high strung. You're
deeper. That's right.
High strung.
High strung. Yeah. I even had my wife say, David, if there was a video camera on you right now, you would be very embarrassed. And she had shouted that from upstairs, and I was downstairs screaming. So, yeah, I'm good at screaming.
You were screaming at the kids?
I don't know what I was screaming about, but I was just, working through issues, I guess. But, when it comes to showing your kids grace, I think, in a fundamentalist or legalistic religion, fear is used to gain the proper behavior. And so there isn't an opportunity to come in, after that, if you do this, you're going straight to hell. But, if you do, call me and I'll come pick you up. That doesn't, those don't go together.
No.
So you have to decide ahead of time, which type of father am I going to be? The one who extends the grace that I long to receive, or the one that just uses fear and manipulation? Because that just leads to more rebellion. Overly focusing on behavior begets more rebellious behavior. And
as you and I have talked about, I felt like, especially with my boys, like you have two sons, I have two sons, they're not going to turn out like me. I'm going to punish that out of them before that can happen. Like I see a little sign of it and I'm going to be hard on them. And, your wisdom in that to me is just, you're spot on in that we're not in control. No. And if anything, they're going to do it to spite the fact that I'm telling them not to do those things because they are part of me.
Yeah. I had a lot of pressure put on me because of our family having the name of our, Hockman hardware. There was some pressure that went with that I talked to my wife about, and she's like, never even heard anybody say, worry about your family name. So really? Your mom or dad, your grandmas, because she was close with her grandparents. Mine were in Kentucky, so I didn't have close relationships. So she had a lot of extended family she's close with. It's like no one ever talked about that. Like that was so foreign to me. I felt like there was eyes always on me, watching me. Make sure you're behaving. And so
I knew if I made my parents look bad, it wasn't going to go good for me.
Yeah. And I once had a counselor that's kind of walking through why, I was a teenage drinker. At 15, I was rebelling very, very seriously with alcohol. And I feel very blessed to be alive today, that God in his infinite mercy was protecting me because I was not doing the right things. That's what made me so afraid of my kids becoming teenagers, is what if they do that, they might not be so blessed. They might, not make it. And so, whenever I was talking to this counselor, he said, have you ever thought that maybe you're trying to bring the family name down by that rebellion?
Ooh.
No, I don't think so. But after we're talking, I kind of could see why that would have been something I might have been motivated by, So, you think back to those kind of things. I don't want my kids to feel that way, but I've made them feel that way when they're younger. And I hope that course corrections stick more than the, those embodied memories they have from when they're little, and I'm getting it wrong. Just by the grace of God, I pray that they'll, do it differently.
Ladies, if you're still with us, David was smart. He asked his wife, Sherry, if she had any thoughts on what we were going to talk about. And one of the things that I thought was really, I mean, she's obviously both Sherry and Angie are smarter than us. We're lucky that they are married to us. We, completely just lay it all
We're
out
the
there.
mess. We're the mess, and they bless us. So
yes, that's right. And so one of the things Sherry said, and both of us having daughters, she wants to talk about what it's like to set a standard on what our daughters look for in husbands. And that's such a great topic of conversation. We talk about going after our children's hearts rather than being compliant.
Right.
Man, I mean, you want your daughter to find a man that has a heart for God, a heart for her, a heart for their eventual children. And that starts with us, David. And I don't feel like I got it right for a long time. I sure hope I'm doing a better job.
Oh, I know I didn't. Yeah, I know I didn't get it right at first.
What was hard for you parenting, Paige?
Well, I just go back to my past and how I was raised, and within that religious framework of how that particular group of people viewed women and what's expected of them. I thought I had shed a lot of that baggage, but I hadn't. Not all of it. I wanted to be very pro-woman in my house. I wanted Paige to feel like, she could grow up to do whatever she wanted to do in life. And yet I made several mistakes along the way that held her back, that were based on fear. Again, not trusting her, not trusting God with the situation, just having fear that, you obviously as a father of boys, you worry about them fathering a child. As a father of a daughter, you worry about her becoming the mother of a child. And so there's concerns for both sides. But in a religious culture where the woman is often blamed for any sexual advances, you got to protect your daughter more. So I was trying to put these fences around her with rules, and it just, she bristled at them, and rightfully so. She just made her feel different, made her feel less than. If I could go back and, she buys a bikini when she's 13 or 14, and I say, yeah, that looks cute, instead of that's immodest. You need to go do something different. And then she looks different from all her friends. And then now I'm this rule person. I'm trying to control everything. And it's such an illusion. She proved very conclusively in my mind, I was not in control. And she knows it. And I thank her for it, because honestly, it made me a better person. She was willing to be rebellious right in the home, whereas at least the boys kind of waited till they're gone in college, I don't have to see it all the time. That's getting a little bit too me focused. But I think that, my wife would probably step in and say something kind, because I'm typically just going to be self-critical. But I think you and I both have a tender heart that very much wants to see people flourish, especially our own family. And I think we do a lot of things towards that end that help that, apologizing when we mess up. I apologized to my daughter on a hike when she was 21 about the whole bikini thing. That's when she revealed it to me. We're in Arizona, and I'm really sorry. I wish I'd have done that differently. And so I think that willingness to be humble and apologize, willingness to tell them how much you love them, tell them why you love them, tell them you're proud of them, but tell them why you're proud of them. And I think just being that tender father, we have a good relationship now, Paige and I, and I'm very blessed by it. There were some rocky years, and she even says, Dad, I realize these were rocky, but I think we've both grown. And we both did.
I think you're right. For me, never hearing from my dad how proud he was of me. After he died, I had a lot of people tell me that. But again, that just made me mad that he never told me that. Yeah. I try to go above and beyond in telling my kids that I love them, that I'm proud of them, why, acknowledge the good. They probably would still say I acknowledge the bad plenty too. I still think you have to get some of that right. If there's a mistake made, you have to call it out, and how can we address it, right? But I try to do it more positively. And I do think it's really important that we tell our kids all those things. And I pray for my children every day. I'm sure you do too, David. I think it's also good to model prayer for our kids. Whether that's at the dinner table or whatever that looks like. If there's a moment that everything is really tense and stressful in the home, to just stop down and pray as a father. Those are ways for us to show our daughters the kind of men that they should be seeking.
That's something I could do. I think that's something I could do better at, is that that just stopping when something's intense and praying right there. I think modeling it at, bedtime and dinner time are good, and those family rituals are important. But wow, just to see that level of trust in someone's life, that when something's really challenging, they're going straight to God. I think that really kind of shows the kids what kind of Heavenly Father we have. So I think that's great doing that.
I had prayed for a while, but obviously losing Hallie 18 months ago,
Yeah,
I pray more than I ever have, and am just more. It's the only thing I know to do, right?
right.
And you want to talk about, like we did a little bit ago, that control is an illusion. I mean, losing a child is full on like, well, I really don't control any of this. And there's coming to terms with that and the grips with that of like, I want to lead well. But now, for me, it's like I want to make sure that my kids' hearts know Jesus. So we have this vertical playing field that we're working with.
Right.
Because it is hard. French, our kids, they have hard times with friends, right? Or they have a breakup with a boyfriend, a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And all that stuff breaks our hearts earthly. And so it's how do we point them towards Jesus and all those things?
Yeah, I think being that safe home base for them to come to, reaching out and just randomly checking in how they're doing, serving them. I mean, I think that was Sherry's point, is show your daughter what kind of man she needs in her life by being that kind of man. And that man is tender and loving and is a servant leader. And, he's not dictatorial. He's not, crazy rage face like I can be at times. I'm sure you've heard the whole stop yelling at me. And you're like, I'm not yelling. This is yelling, Or, you can yell.
They're like, you're mad at me. I'm like, I'm not mad. They're like, you're yelling. I'm not yelling.
I'm just an intense person.
I'm the same way. I'm like, it's like I said to you, I'm like, when I'm yelling, it's like, I'm yelling now and it's really loud. Yeah. Me being this is just direct, but to my kids, I'm yelling at them.
Everybody's dysregulated and a mess at that point.
Maybe I'm high strung too, David. Maybe that's my wife says I'm dramatic. Maybe it's high strung. Better.
I like passionate. That doesn't sound bad,
Hey, see, we're working our way around that. Passionate. And it is true. Like dad voices, whether this is right or wrong, tend to carry more weight than the mom voice, because there's just like a deeper registered tone. And again, when you and I just think we're being direct, they think we're yelling and we're not.
Right.
I mean, you're the doctor. You probably know the science behind that more than I would, but it feels like there's a difference between dad voice versus mom voice.
Yeah, I think this probably goes back to relational difference. That mom is typically the more focused on being the primary caregiver, just naturally from birth. I mean, they feed the child and you might take your turn with a bottle, or you might just be the one who changes the diaper. But the mother and infant bond, starting from, the pregnancy, there's just something they have that, like we talked about, we'll never have that. Nobody's growing inside of us. And,
So my wife always says,
it's just a very different
inside of me. I know you at your core. I grew you in my belly.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, you got me there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I think that men and women parent differently, and it can have different effects, some good, some bad on both sides. But I think there's something about the dad voice, that's just somehow loses some of its tenderness, maybe. Makes kids feel intimidated when you don't necessarily mean for them to be intimidated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah, I do. I do. I will say this. I am a calmer father since I met Angie 5 years ago. I am a calmer father since we lost Hallie. And I just feel like God just continuously working to try to bring me to a place in life that he wants me to be. And as you and I are, we both like to be achievers in life. And so I think I would, if I'm being honest with you, friend to friend, David, I think being a father sometimes is one of the great areas that I find frustration that I didn't figure it out sooner, right? Wanting to be an achiever in life, feeling like maybe I let my kids down or even my spouse because I wasn't fathering well. I wasn't parenting well. That hurts my heart, right?
Yeah. And I think the only thing that we can do with those emotions is just take them to our Heavenly Father and just trust that his grace is sufficient, which it is, that no matter what we go through or what we've done wrong, he has a plan. Like we said, we're not in control. He has a plan. It's a greater plan. I guess I started off the podcast a little bit of a lie because I said everybody, we got these 3 new family members and it's great. It's like it is. I mean, it's pretty good now. It's rocky in the beginning, and I don't have to parent those 3. So it's like, it's not as challenging, probably, I don't think, as a blended family. I'm not working on not parenting and just, being a safe place at this point. But introducing 3 new people into a family dynamic takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of trust in who each child has chosen. And it takes a lot of trust among the siblings to trust each other that they know what's best for them in their life. And that's the person they've chosen. And I always wanted to let my kids know that who you love, we will love. And I had to be careful with that because even back when they had girlfriends, boyfriends, and all that, well, the boys, when they had girlfriends, Paige didn't like that I was so welcoming. And I had to, once she was able to communicate that, we worked through that. I had a little seashell that we found together on one of our vacations, and I put in a little tiny Sharpie, always first in my heart, love you, Dad. And a little fishing line. She keeps it on her gear shifter in her car, and still does. That was when she's 16. But it's just that pursuit of her heart to wonder, how come you don't want me to love them equally in the family in case they might be in family? Well, she was able to communicate that, I'm not feeling as honored. And so we can't control all those kind of things or predict them but God's got a plan and he's faithful and he's bringing us along step by step, hopefully, to just make improvements, progress. It's a journey.
Yeah.
We certainly aren't ever going to feel like we arrived, I don't think. I know I haven't.
I feel like you're going to be a super grandpa someday.
I hope so.
You got these 3 kids married. It's only a matter of time. I feel like you're going to be a great, great grandpa based on just the guy that I know and your heart and just you're a good man.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your friendship.
As our time about you, Eric. Absolutely.
Thank you. As our time gets ready to expire today, Matthew, just a couple more questions real quick as we wrap. But what do you think is, I didn't prep you for this ahead of time, so if you need to think about it, you can.
Okay.
What do you think is the highlight for you of being a father at this point of your life?
There's just so many, I mean, you're proud of them when they graduate. You're proud of them when they accomplish things. But when you see that all 3 children have chosen someone who loves Jesus and wants to follow Jesus, and I see, my little Paige, who was rebellious and taught me that I should need control. When she talks to me about the 2-year-old she takes care of in the daycare at church where she volunteers before they worship. And her husband, Josh, helps with the 4th graders. And they're doing this voluntarily, and they're members of the church in St. Louis. And I mean, that just melts my heart. I had the opportunity to give a toast or a prayer at each of the kids' weddings. And just that was a highlight for sure. Just because in that moment, you're kind of handing your kids off, right, to leave the family of origin and create their own family. It doesn't mean leave behind, and cleave's not like cutting a rock in half. It's like bringing them together. They're cleaving to their wife, something that's a union. But it changes the dynamics, It's time to step back. And when each one was such a celebration, and I guess I just don't have to, if I'm honest, I worry about them still.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were realistic, I would see the big picture and know that God has brought them safely thus far, and they've chosen Christian spouses, and they're walking in faith. It just, that's what I love.
That's awesome. I love your answer. And selfishly, knowing what an emotional guy you are, I love how emotional we could be on our walk and talks. I wanted people to know that side of you. And I really thought that would make you cry, and it did.
That's why you didn't prep. Couldn't steal my reserve.
That's funny. Final question we ask all of our guests, David. What do you guys have do you personally have a favorite family tradition?
Yes, we have a birthday tradition. You go around the table and say, what is your favorite memory with that person that year? And what is a quality in that person that you see growing and that you appreciate? And it's experiential as well as emotional, so it's And a lot of times, we kind of got to get the phone out and scroll through the last year's pictures and try to, use our external memory banks. But those are always very special.
Yeah.
And it's times like that you realize, I haven't really totally screwed this up because they've said some nice things on my birth. It just helps everyone and the whole family to feel affirmed and loved. And that's something Sherry got started. I don't remember when, but we've kept it going and we love it.
We started doing that a few years back. It's similar. I think we could do, we don't have the favorite memory for the past year, but I think we should. I really like that. That's a great idea. So
yeah, it's fun.
That's good. Well, buddy, I hope you have a wonderful Father's Day. And
well, thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and do really appreciate your friendship and also your just mentorship in my life and my walk with Jesus. And so thank you very much, David. Appreciate you being on.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate you having me on. And just as the last parting bit, I would just say we also need to give ourselves grace, and that critical inner voice that shames us. Jesus died to silence that voice. Not to silence if we need to repent. That's the Holy Spirit's work in us. But to silence that constant voice saying, you didn't do that right. You didn't measure up. The good news about parenting is you don't have to get it right every time, just most of the time.
Yeah.
And we can give ourselves grace that we want them to receive. Why not give it to ourselves?
I love that. That's great. That's a perfect note to end on. So,
all right. Thank you.
Yeah. To dads everywhere, we hope you have a happy Father's Day this weekend. If your dad is alive, call him. Text them something. I miss being able to do that with mine, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, me
David.
too. Yeah.
So for all of our listeners, thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to Blended Blessed and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.